Chapter 30. Truth. The Expanse.
"Where am I?"
Crinan whispered. He didn't know how much time had passed since he had been thrust into the flames, or if it had even happened at all, but suddenly he was thinking again. He replayed the encounter with Thornscale in his mind, watched it happen all over again, and he felt his heart break.
"Malinka."
Crinan whispered her name reverently.
"Why?"
"Relax, Crinan. All is well." A familiar voice called out to him. Crinan gasped and jerked his head around, searching for the voice. He glanced down and saw his hands. He saw his body. Darkness no longer blotted out his existence, and he let out a sigh of gratitude for the simple fact that he could see himself. His defined form stood out in contrast to the world around him, which was completely white. No shadows, no floor, no walls or sky. Just white.
"Sage,"
Crinan said in response to the voice.
"Sage, what was that?"
Once again, Sage was represented by a fog. It was gray, anthropoid, and on occasion Crinan could see vague facial expressions of a person embossed in the smoke. But Sage was still a mystery. He was still just a voice.
"That was Dread's Keep,"
Sage answered calmly.
"You just endured the first challenge you will go through in that place. I should say I am relieved to see that you have emerged relatively unscathed." "Unscathed?"
Crinan snorted as he looked down at his feet. He saw that he was dressed again. He took a deep breath through his nose and shook his head.
"Why did that happen?"
"Well, I do not know what happened to you inside there," Sage replied. He moved forward, and wisps of his body trailed behind him. "But whatever it was meant to test you. You see, the first challenge of Dread's Keep is designed to help players isolate and overcome their greatest fears. It was created to better the citizens of Govia by way of forcing them to face what plagues their minds in the most brutal way imaginable. The developers saw it as a way to force a person to become stronger, but as I have gathered, it is also known to drive a person mad. Numerous players have left that place screaming and tearing at their skin or simply in a catatonic state. The Keep is generally avoided these days."
"But why doesn't Govia just shut it down?"
Crinan asked.
"Why would they keep it if it hurts their players?"
"They keep it as a test of fortitude," Sage simply replied. "If a player makes it out of the Keep, then Govia knows to keep their eye on them. A good candidate for recruitment, I should say."
"So this place is what?"
Crinan asked.
"A military test?"
"In a sense, yes," Sage said. "By way of the challenges of the Hells, Govia can isolate and identify the strong. That is, of course, not the primary purpose of the Hells, however."
"Primary purpose?"
Crinan repeated.
"To punish non-Govians?"
"No, Crinan. The primary purpose of the Hells is to sin," Sage corrected. "For, as you know, sin is illegal in the mainland. The Hells give the citizens an outlet to express their most violent and perverse desires. If the citizens are provided a place to drain their sin, then the idea is that they will not cause trouble in the real world."
"Right."
Crinan nodded along.
"Yeah, I've heard this before."
"That you have," Sage replied. He paused for a moment as he looked Crinan over. His tone changed to one of compassion. "How are you holding up?" Crinan snorted and looked away. He saw Malinka's violent death in his mind once again and sighed heavily.
"It's whatever,"
he said dismissively.
"I just need to get out of here as soon as possible."
"Fortunately, that opportunity is available to you," Sage said warmly. "You are almost done, Crinan. You are closer than you have ever been. All you need to do is remain strong and keep pushing. Do not give in. Do not give up. You will succeed, for surrender simply isn't in your blood." He paused for a moment. "Well,
At least on what I understand about your parents, it isn't. Yeah, Krynen said. I won't give up. Not after I've come this far. I mean, I can't, right? If I do, then what? I just burn forever?
You do, Sage said frankly. But you won't. Sage approached and placed a misty hand on Krynen's shoulder. I have faith in you, child. You should too.
Dad!
Krynen heard the voice of Lukas suddenly shout from Sage's body.
Dad! Govia's outside! They found us!
Govia?
Krynen repeated, suddenly worried about Sage and Lukas.
You guys have to...
Krynen, I should say this is something you do not need to worry about, Sage said with an almost arrogant tone. I can handle Govians, but I fear we must part for now. Do not fear. Do not give up. He nodded, and Krynen was able to make out a smile in the smoke. I will see you again. At that, Sage dissipated, and Krynen was left alone. He looked around for a moment and realized that there was nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to see, only white all around him.
Well, shit, Krynen sighed. I guess I just wait.
Krynen sat down and heaved a sigh. He thought over Malinka's death, grimacing at the memory of it. He had failed her again. Krynen lowered his head as he sulked over that fact.
No, I'll find her,
he promised himself.
This time I really will.
Krynen closed his eyes for a moment, and then he woke up. Dread's Keep.
Congratulations, citizen. You have shown the world that your faith in Dura Anna and our great Emperor Sidro is mightier than the fear you hold within your heart. Your devotion in those that give you life and freedom will deliver you from this place if you hold fast and continue to lay your fate in their hands. Remember, citizen, as it was spoken in the Book of Devon, chapter 17, verse...
Skip, Krynen sighed.
Congratulations, you have conquered Dread's Keep, level 1, plus 300 million rank. Congratulations, Pretty Kitty 6969420, you have advanced in ranking. Previous rank, 17,956,158,472. New rank, 17,656,158,472. Previous percentile, 59%. New percentile, 58%.
Krynen could hear water dripping, and somewhere nearby a torch cast a dim light and vaguely illuminated the area around him. He was in a small room lined with shaped granite brick walls. They glistened as if they were wet, and it reminded Krynen of the walls of a cave. From somewhere nearby, he could hear soft weeping. He looked around, and in the dim light he spotted the huddled form of a blonde she-elf. She was seated on the ground with her head lowered between her knees and her fingers interlocked behind her neck. She cried softly, perhaps thinking she was alone, and Krynen took a step forward to get a better look.
Hey,
Krynen gently called out to her.
Are you...
The she-elf looked up and quickly pushed herself up off the ground.
Krynen?
She called out. Her expression was one of surprise, but it also sounded hopeful.
Is that you?
Krynen's stomach did a flip when he heard her voice. He took another step forward, stopped and thought about it, and then ran to her. Before she could protest, Krynen wrapped his arms around Malinka and he squeezed tightly, pressing his cheek hard against hers.
I thought...
He rasped as tears began to line his own eyes.
I thought you were dead.
Krynen?
Malinka replied solemnly.
No, I'm right here.
But you were...
Krynen stepped back, moving his hands down to her shoulders.
You were squeezed to death. The demons, they ate you.
Yes.
Malinka snorted. She raised her eyebrows and looked away for a moment, but couldn't keep her eyes off his for long.
And you were crying like a little bitch.
Krynen cleared his throat and reached up to wipe his tears away.
Yeah, so I cry sometimes. Deal with it.
Malinka's body trembled with laughter for a moment, but she didn't break their eye contact.
You'll never change, will you?
I don't know, Krynen replied.
Yeah.
Malinka whispered. She leaned back into him and wrapped her arms around his midsection.
You know, Krynen, I've decided that I don't think I want you to.
Krynen didn't know what to say. He never knew what to say. He was not a person who expressed himself by speaking. He simply had a hard time figuring out his feelings and then making the words go. Instead, Krynen shared how he felt with actions. A punch to the face, a sword to the gut. That was how he communicated best. But he, in rare circumstances, had also been able to give a hug of support, a nod of respect, and perhaps...
Krynen?
Malinka asked. Her ear was pressed against his chest, and he could feel his heart beating steadily against her.
Huh?
Krynen asked.
Are you real?
Yeah,
Krynen replied.
I'm not sure of much in this place, but one thing I am sure of is that I'm here.
Malinka smirked, and she pulled back a bit, looking up at him. A serious expression was plastered on her face, but her eyes were curious. They seemed to demand the answer to a question.
You never...
She said softly, finally averting her gaze.
Back in Camelot, I mean? You never said it back.
Said what?
Krynen thought about it, and his own eyes grew wide.
Oh.
Why not?
Well,
Krynen didn't know how to reply. He raked his brain for the right words, and then prayed to the brothers that they would come out correctly.
I didn't think I needed to. I know what I felt. I
get it,
Malinka said with a thin smile. She leaned back into him, and he felt her squeeze a little tighter.
Do you want to know what mine was?
Your what?
Krynen asked.
My fear, idiot. Like what the demon wanted us to admit.
Oh,
Krynen replied and nodded his head.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Well,
Malinka said. He could feel the vibration of her voice in his chest, the feeling of her fingers digging into his shirt. He wasn't about to tell her, but he couldn't lie to himself. He liked being close to her again.
I've been waiting for you for years,
she finally said.
I realized back there that I fear so badly what happens when you actually find me.
What do you mean?
Krynen asked. He squeezed her closer, and she burrowed a little deeper into his chest.
I'm right here.
No, Krynen. When you really find me. I mean, what if you're not the same? What if that fire isn't there anymore? What if you have found someone else?
She paused and pressed her forehead against his sternum.
Why didn't you ever come for me, Krynen?
Krynen bit his lip and looked up at the ceiling, realizing that this time there was no fight to be had. He couldn't just yell and scream and run away from the conversation. He couldn't make her feel like an idiot for asking. He couldn't reverse the question and ask her why she never came for him. Krynen had to grow up and face the truth that he had been burying so deep for so long. The same truth that came to the surface when Thornscale forced it out of him.
Aye,
Krynen said softly. He closed his eyes and rested his chin atop Malinka's head.
I was afraid.
What?
Malinka asked with a small laugh.
Why?
Because,
Krynen answered. He felt his walls go up. His mind was screaming at him to retreat, to run and hide, but he let his heart speak louder.
'Cause I didn't ever want to lose what we had in Camelot,
he finally admitted. Tears welled up in his eyes and his lower lip quivered.
It was perfect, Malinka. Good things, they never stay that way for me. They always get ruined with time. They die. I wanted to hold on to our memory. I didn't want it to change. I didn't want you to get to know the real me and hate me. I just wanted to cherish the thought of you for the rest of my life and never risk losing you again.
Krynen sniffled and he shook his head.
I thought of you. I thought of you every night. When I laid down in bed and closed my stupid fucking eyes, there you were, waiting for me in the Wilshire Highlands, all fucking dirty and chirpy and perfect. The truth, Malinka, is I'm afraid you will never, ever love me the same way you did ever again.
I keep holding on to how you made me feel. I don't want to lose it, Malinka. That is my greatest fucking fear.
Malinka was silent. Krynen heard her sniffle once, and then she let go of him. She took a step backward, her head lowered, and then after a moment, she looked up at him.
You're a fucking idiot,
she said with a snarl. She stared up at him, shaking her head and clenching her hands into fists.
You are so fucking stupid, Krynen Jameso.
Well, that's not what I expected. Krynen was blindsided by her response. I'm sorry,
Let me make one thing perfectly clear,
she fiercely declared.
I will never stop loving you, Krynen.
At that, she lunged forward, hooked her arm around Krynen's neck, and pulled his head down. She firmly pressed her lips against his and held her palm against his cheek. Krynen did not resist. He placed his hands on her hips and leaned into the kiss. He kissed her long, and he kissed her fiercely. He had dreamt of the same few kisses they had shared when they were teenagers for years, to a point where they had lost their original impact on him. He had forgotten that Malinka really existed, and in doing so had robbed them both of the love that never had an opportunity to grow. Malinka pushed against Krynen's chest, walking forward as she did. Eventually, he was pressed up against the wall. Krynen snorted, lifted her up, and spun, pressing her against the wall and locking his lips onto hers. I've dreamed of this Krynen whispered as their lips broke apart. For so fucking long.
Shut up, idiot,
Malinka replied with a smile.
Just kiss me.
She wrapped her legs around his waist and clung to him tightly. She never wanted to let go. She would never let Krynen Jameso go again.
You know I fucking hate you,
Malinka whispered in a gentle tone as their foreheads touched.
For leaving me?
Yeah, Krynen grunted. I hate me too.
You have a lot to make up for,
she continued. I know. The two stood silently for a moment as their hearts once again melded together like they had back in Camelot. She reached up and ran her fingers through the hair on the side of his head. Yes. Is this love? Krynen whispered.
I don't know,
Malinka replied, a smile spreading across her face.
I think so.
Can I say it? Krynen asked as he gently brushed the tips of his lips over hers.
You fucking better,
Malinka replied. A loud explosion shook the entire room. Krynen and Malinka lost their balance and fell to the floor. The walls trembled, dust fell off the ceiling, and Krynen watched as cracks formed in the floor. What the fuck? Krynen yelled. What's going on?
Earthquake?
Malinka asked. Take my hand, Krynen shouted. Come on, let's find... Another tremor shook the room, and the two of them fell once again. Krynen watched as the opposite side of the room was suddenly engulfed in swirling blackness, and his heart sank. Malinka! He shouted. The force of the vortex opposite him was blowing his hair in all directions. Malinka, are you there?
Yes, Krynen.
Malinka frustratedly shouted back.
Are you?
They both worried this was another test from Thornscale, and their fingers quickly interlocked. I'm here! Krynen grunted as he worked to get to his feet. His eyes squinted as he watched the form of a person appear in the vortex. He snarled and let go of Malinka's hand as he pulled his sword free from its scabbard and stepped forward. Wrought by the flames of eternal damnation, the figure called out, shaped by the hammer of the injustice and treachery of life. The vortex suddenly collapsed on itself, leaving the figure standing alone on the opposite side of the room for Krynen. Krynen squinted his eyes at the person, finally realizing who it was. That which was knocked away hath surfaced, my true self renewed. The figure stepped forward, lowering the hood of his robes and holding his arms out, palms facing Krynen. It was Ander. An eon it has been since my last death. An eternity it shall be until my next. Born again, just as Duran shall be upon my return. Salvation stands before thee, my friends. Look upon me, for within my everlasting eyes lies your destiny. What the fucking fuck is going on right now? Krynen shouted. The first step of the final Messiah, Anders sang. Rejoice, for salvation is here.